I booked the private room, paid with my own card. When the bill hit the table, he slapped me in front of everyone. They didn't know about the tiny microphone sewn into my collar, broadcasting live to exactly where it needed to be. I wasn't there to cry. I was there to settle accounts, not just for dinner. If you've ever been treated like a living ATM for a toxic family, stay with me till the end of this story. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I learned early that peace was a luxury I couldn't afford in my own home. Marion Hill, Colorado, wasn't a bad place to grow up if you had the right family. Tree-lined streets, good schools, neighbors who smiled and waved. But behind our pristine white door with its seasonal wreath, I lived in a different world entirely. Paul came into our lives when I was 7. My mother introduced him as your new daddy, her eyes bright with something I now recognize as desperate hope. He had a firm handshake, a steady job at the local bank, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The neighbors loved him. Such a family man, they'd say, watching him mow our lawn in perfectly straight lines every Saturday morning. They never heard the way his footsteps changed when he crossed our threshold. Outside, he walked with measured confidence. Inside, those same feet became weapons of unpredictability, heavy, sudden. I learned to track him through the house by sound alone, the way prey animals learn to sense predators. Rachel. His voice would boom through the walls, and my stomach would clench. It didn't matter what I was doing, homework, reading, trying to disappear into my own thoughts. That voice meant I'd done something wrong, even if I hadn't left my room all day. The infractions were endless and ever-changing. A glass left on the counter, a book bag placed 2 inches from where he thought it should be, breathing too loudly during his evening news. He never hit me, not then. Paul was smarter than that. He specialized in words that cut deeper than fists ever could. "You're lucky I'm here," he'd say, standing in my doorway, blocking the light. "You know what happens to families without fathers. You'd be nothing. Your mother would be nothing. This house, this life, it's all because of me." My mother became a ghost of herself. The woman who used to sing while cooking dinner now moved through our house in silence. When Paul raised his voice, she'd find urgent tasks in other rooms. When I looked to her for help, she'd offer weak smiles and whispered platitudes. "He's just tired from work. Honey, he doesn't mean it. We need to be understanding." I started spending hours at the library after school. Mrs. Davidson, the head librarian, never asked why I stayed until closing time. She'd just smile and let me help her sort returns, teaching me the Dewey Decimal System like it was sacred knowledge. Books became my escape pods, each story a temporary exit from the house where I had to calculate every movement, every word, every breath. By the time I hit middle school, I developed a sixth sense for Paul's moods. I could tell by the way he closed the car door whether dinner would be silent or explosive. I knew which topics were landmines money, my grades if they were too good, my mother's family, and which were safe harbors his work achievements, the Broncos, anything that made him look good. My mother tried, in her broken way, to create buffers. She'd slip $20 bills into my backpack with notes for after-school snacks. We both knew I'd stay out as long as that money could buy me time in the local diner, nursing a single milkshake for hours while doing homework. The worst part wasn't the fear or the walking on eggshells. It was the gaslighting that came after every incident. "You're too sensitive," Paul would say the morning after screaming at me for an hour about a B+ in chemistry. "I'm just trying to push you to be better. Other kids would kill for a father who cares this much." My mother would nod along, adding her own poison. "He's right, Rachel. You need to be more grateful. Do you know how many men would have walked away from a ready-made family? Paul chose us. He chose to stay." I started keeping a journal hidden behind my dresser, documenting everything. Not because I thought anyone would believe me or help I'd given up on that fantasy. I wrote to stay sane, to remind myself that what I was experiencing was real, that I wasn't the crazy one. High school brought new challenges. Paul discovered he could weaponize my need for independence. College applications required his tax information. Scholarship forms needed his signature. He'd delay, claiming he was too busy, then explode if I reminded him about deadlines. "Everything is always about you. "Isn't it?" he'd snarl. "Maybe if you showed some appreciation for once, people would want to help you." But I was learning too. Learning that grades were my ticket out. That teachers would write recommendation letters if you worked hard enough. That guidance counselors had ways to mark applications as special circumstances when parental cooperation was limited. I studied like my life depended on it. Because it did. The day my acceptance letter came from the University of Colorado, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. It came with a full scholarship for computer science. I'd pivoted from my original interest in literature because tech meant jobs, and jobs meant freedom. Paul's reaction was predictable. "Computer science. That's a man's field. You'll fail out in a semester and come crawling back." But I saw something else in his eyes that day. Fear. He was losing control. And we both knew it. My mother cried that night, but not from joy. "How can you leave us?" she whispered when Paul was at his bowling league. "Who will I talk to? Who will help me with him?" I wanted to scream that she was the parent, that protecting me should have been her job. Instead, I held her while she sobbed, already knowing that leaving wouldn't mean escaping. The chains would just get longer, not disappear. That summer before college, Paul's behavior escalated. If he couldn't keep me trapped physically, he'd do it financially. "Your mother needs help with bills," he announced one night at dinner. "Room and board isn't free, even for family. Time you learned about real responsibility." I'd been working at a local bookstore, saving every penny for college expenses not covered by my scholarship. Now half my paychecks went to household expenses, though I noticed Paul's beer brand got more expensive, and my mother started carrying a designer purse she claimed was a gift from a friend. 3 days before I left for college, I found my mother sitting in my room, holding my old stuffed rabbit. "You were such a sweet little girl," she said, not looking at me. "Always trying to make everyone happy. I'm sorry I couldn't. I'm sorry." It was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging what she'd let happen. I wanted to forgive her, to say it was okay, that I understood, but the words wouldn't come, because it wasn't okay, and understanding didn't make it hurt less. As I packed my final box, I could hear Paul downstairs, already on his 3rd beer, ranting to my mother about ungrateful children who didn't appreciate sacrifice. My childhood bedroom looked smaller than ever, stripped of posters and personality, but I wasn't sad to leave it behind. I was 18 years old, and I'd never felt safe in my own home, but I was leaving, and that was something. I didn't know then that the real trap was just beginning, that Paul would find new ways to control me from hundreds of miles away, that my mother would become his willing accomplice in keeping me tethered to their dysfunction. All I knew was that his footsteps couldn't follow me to college. For the first time in over a decade, I would sleep without listening for them, without the constant calculation of threat and safety that had defined my existence. I thought I was free. I was wrong. But that night, loading boxes into a borrowed car while Paul sulked and my mother wept, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of peace. It would be years before I understood that some prisons don't need walls, and the most effective chains are the ones we're convinced to lock around our own wrists. But at 18, escape felt like victory. If only I'd known what was coming. The University of Colorado at Boulder felt like stepping into another dimension. My dorm room was half the size of my bedroom back home, but it was mine. No footsteps in the hallway carried threats. No one monitored how long I spent in the library. For the first few weeks, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in panic, thinking I'd heard Paul's voice. Then I'd remember I was 3 hours away from Marion Hill, safe. My scholarship covered tuition and housing, but everything else required money. I found 3 part-time jobs within my first month tutoring calculus, working the late shift at the campus computer lab, and data entry for a professor's research project. Between classes and work, I barely had time to sleep, but exhaustion felt like freedom compared to the hypervigilance of home. I changed my major to data science after discovering I had a knack for finding patterns in chaos, a skill honed by years of predicting Paul's moods from microscopic changes in his behavior. My professors noticed my dedication. "You work like someone's chasing you," Dr. Martinez observed once, watching me code through lunch. If only she knew how right she was. The call started during my second month, always from my mother, always with the same opener. Paul's having a hard time at work. The subtext was clear, his bad mood was somehow my fault for leaving. She'd slip in mentions of bills, of how expensive everything was getting, how Paul's hours had been cut a lie. I'd later discover I sent $50 from my tutoring money, then $100, then it became a monthly expectation. "It's just to help with groceries," my mother would say, her voice thin over the phone. "You know how proud Paul is. It hurts him to struggle like this." I knew I was being manipulated, but the guilt was a familiar chain. They'd trained me well. My happiness was selfishness. My independence was betrayal. My success was their sacrifice. The mental programming ran deep, executing even from hundreds of miles away. Junior year, I landed an internship at a Denver tech startup. The pay was good, better than all my campus jobs combined. The first thing my mother said when I told her wasn't congratulations. It was, "Oh, that's wonderful, Paul will be so relieved. Things have been so tight here." The requests escalated. 200 a month became 3, then 5, always framed as temporary, always accompanied by my mother's tears. "Just until Paul gets back on his feet," she'd promise. "You're the only one who can help us. Rachel, we sacrifice so much for your education." I started skipping meals to make the money stretch. Ramen became a food group. My roommate Jessica noticed, started inviting me to leftovers parties, where she'd conveniently cook too much pasta. I think she knew, but she never pushed. Small kindnesses from strangers meant everything then. The summer before senior year, I stayed in Boulder, working full-time at the startup. They offered to convert my internship to a full-time position after graduation, $75,000. A year plus benefits, in Colorado. That was solid money for a new grad. I calculated how much I could save, how quickly I could build a real life. Then Paul called, not my mother Paul himself, which meant something was seriously wrong. "Your mother's sick," he said without preamble. "Medical bills are killing us, but I suppose you're too busy with your fancy computer job to care about family." It was a lie. Of course, I'd find out later she'd had a routine gallbladder surgery, fully covered by his insurance. But in that moment, the panic was real. The guilt was real. The training kicked in family first, always, no matter the cost. I sent $2,000 from my signing bonus. Senior year blurred past in a haze of classes, work, and monthly transfers home. I graduated summa cum laude with 3 job offers. I took the one in Seattle Stepfather, a cybersecurity firm offering $85,000 to start, far enough away that surprise visits would be impossible, close enough that I couldn't use distance as an excuse not to help. My mother cried when I told her about Seattle. "So far away," she wept. "Paul says you're abandoning us. He's right, isn't he? We're not good enough for you now that you're educated." The manipulation was so transparent it should have been laughable. But you can know you're being played and still feel the strings pulling. That's what people don't understand about emotional abuse. Awareness doesn't automatically mean immunity. I moved to Seattle in August, settling into a studio apartment in Capitol Hill. Stepfather was everything I'd hoped: challenging work, smart colleagues, a manager who actually mentored instead of terrorized. For the first time since leaving for college, I started to relax, started to believe I could build something real. The calls ramped up immediately. "Seattle's so expensive," my mother would sigh. "Meanwhile, we can barely afford heating oil. Paul's pride won't let him ask. But Rachel, honey, if you could just help a little more." A little more, always a little more. My starting salary looked like wealth to them. Never mind Seattle's cost of living. I was paying $600 for a studio apartment, trying to save for emergencies, paying off the credit card debt I'd accumulated keeping myself fed through college. But none of that mattered. I had more than them, so I owed them everything. I set up automatic transfers, $100 to $200 monthly, nearly a third of my take-home pay. But it bought me something valuable: fewer phone calls, fewer guilt trips, Fewer reminders of what I'd escaped and what still held me captive. My coworkers started inviting me to happy hours, weekend hikes, normal 20-something activities. I usually declined. How could I explain that I couldn't afford drinks because I was supporting two able-bodied adults who'd spent my childhood telling me I was worthless? How could I describe the weight of being a wallet with a daughter's name? "You work too much," Malik from the security team told me one Friday, finding me still at my desk at 9 p.m. "Whatever you're running from, it'll still be there Monday." But he was wrong. What I was running from called every Sunday like clockwork, had my routing number memorized, and knew exactly which buttons to push to keep me paying. You can't outrun something that lives in your head, speaks with your mother's voice, and wears your stepfather's sneer. I threw myself into work, earning promotions, salary increases. Each raise meant my mother calling with new emergencies, new needs. Paul's car broke down. The roof needed replacing. Medical bills always vague. Never documented piled up. I never questioned it. Just adjusted my budget. Cut more corners. Sent more money. Looking back, I can see how they groomed me for this role. Every childhood moment of being told I was expensive, difficult, ungrateful it all led here. They'd raised a cash cow, trained her to feel guilty for existing, then set her loose to graze in distant pastures while they milked her dry. But something else was happening in Seattle. Something they hadn't counted on. Distance didn't just mean physical space. It meant perspective. It meant seeing other families, healthy ones, where parents celebrated their children's success instead of resenting it, where love wasn't transactional, and support flowed both ways. I was learning that the life they'd convinced me was normal was anything but. That realization would eventually be their downfall. But first, I had to hit rock bottom, had to see exactly how deep their manipulation ran. The Thanksgiving visit that changed everything was still a year away. For now, I kept paying, kept believing their lies, kept thinking that maybe, if I gave enough, I could finally earn something that had never been for sale, their love. I was 23 years old, making good money at a job I loved, living in a beautiful city 3,000 miles from home, and I was drowning, one automatic transfer at a time. The girl who documented Paul's abuse in hidden journals was still there, somewhere beneath the guilt and obligation. She was gathering data, recognizing patterns, preparing for a reckoning she couldn't yet name. But first, she had to learn the hard way that you can't purchase peace from people who profit from your pain. 3 years in Seattle had transformed me, at least on the surface. I'd been promoted twice at Sinteltra, now leading a small team in our threat detection division. My salary had climbed to $105,000. I'd moved from that cramped studio to a one-bedroom in Fremont with actual sunlight and a tiny balcony where I grew herbs. To my colleagues, I probably looked like a success story young professional thriving in tech, building her career brick by brick. They didn't see the other spreadsheet I maintained, the one tracking monthly transfers home. $1,200 had crept up to $1,500, then $1,800. Always justified by crises that seemed to strike with mathematical precision, usually right after I'd mentioned a raise or bonus in our weekly calls. The water heater exploded. My mother would sob 1 month. "The insurance deductible is killing us." "Paul's medication isn't covered anymore," came the next. "It's $300 a month. Without it, his back pain is unbearable." Each crisis resolved. Another would emerge. The car needed transmission work. The property tax had increased. Paul's hours were cut again. Funny how a bank manager's schedule seemed so unstable. I never asked for documentation anymore. Asking meant longer calls, more tears, accusations of not trusting family. My team at work started noticing patterns I was blind to at home. "You're really good at detecting anomalies in data," Sarah, our junior analyst, mentioned during a team meeting. "You see connections everyone else misses." The irony wasn't lost on me. I could spot a sophisticated phishing campaign from a single suspicious email header, but I couldn't see the con running through my own bank account. The calls came like clockwork. Sunday evenings, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. in Colorado. My phone would ring, and my stomach would clench. Sometimes I let it go to voicemail. then listened to my mother's increasingly frantic messages until guilt drove me to call back. "I was worried sick," she'd say. "You never miss our calls. Paul thought something terrible had happened." The manipulation was masterful. Miss one call, and I was selfish. Answer it, and I was bombarded with problems only my money could solve. I started scheduling work emergencies on Sundays, real ones that required me to be unreachable. The relief of missing those calls was worth the extra hours. My bank account told a stark story. Despite my six-figure salary, I had less than $5,000 in savings. Seattle wasn't cheap, but it wasn't that expensive. The math only worked when you factored in my second household in Colorado, the one that consumed money like a black hole consumes light. Then came the invitation that would begin to crack everything open: Thanksgiving dinner with my coworker Emma's family. "You can't spend another holiday alone," she insisted. "My mom cooks for an army anyway." I'd planned to work through Thanksgiving, my usual strategy, but Emma persisted, and something in me craved seeing what a normal family holiday looked like. I accepted, then spent 2 weeks dreading it, convinced I'd reveal myself as the damaged goods I was. Emma's family was everything mine wasn't. Her parents asked about my work with genuine interest, not calculating how much I earned. Her siblings teased each other with affection, not cruelty. When her father raised his voice during a football game, nobody flinched. It was just enthusiasm, not a threat. "You're so lucky," Emma's mom said, refilling my wine glass. "Your parents must be so proud. A young woman making it on her own in tech, that's wonderful." I mumbled something appropriate, but inside, something shifted. Lucky proud. The words felt foreign, like trying to speak a language I'd never learned. That night, back in my apartment, I made a decision. I'd go home for Christmas. It had been 2 years since I'd seen them in person. Maybe distance had warped my memories. Maybe things were different now. Maybe I'd see them with fresh eyes and understand why I kept paying, kept giving, kept hoping. I booked the flight with points, not wanting to add travel costs to my stretched budget. Told my mother I was coming. Her response was predictable. "Oh, thank God. Paul's been so depressed. This will cheer him up. You are staying here, right? Not wasting money on a hotel." The flight landed in Denver on December 23rd. I rented a car, another expense I couldn't really afford, and drove the familiar route to Marion Hill. The town looked smaller than I remembered, frozen in time like a snow globe nobody shook anymore. Pulling up to the house, I noticed the new car first, a BMW SUV, recent model, sitting where Paul's 10-year-old Honda used to be. My mother must have seen my face through the window because she rushed out, already explaining. "Paul got an incredible deal. His friend was selling it, practically giving it away. We couldn't pass it up. You know how important reliable transportation is." Inside, more changes. A 70-inch TV dominated the living room. New leather furniture replaced the old fabric couch. The kitchen had been updated with stainless steel appliances. Everything screamed money I thought they didn't have. "You've remodeled," I said carefully. "Oh, just little things," my mother deflected. "Paul's been doing some side work. He's so handy." Paul emerged from his den now equipped with what looked like a high-end gaming setup. He'd gained weight, his face fuller, softer, the face of a man who wasn't missing any meals. "Rachel," he nodded, not getting up. "About time you showed your face. Your mother's been beside herself." Dinner was surreal. They talked about vacations they were planning, a cruise maybe, or perhaps Vegas. My mother showed off a new designer purse, an early Christmas gift from Paul. They complained about the cost of landscaping, how the service they'd hired was highway robbery, all while I calculated how many skipped lunches each luxury represented. The breaking point came when my mother mentioned, almost casually, "Oh, we'll need January's help a little early. Paul's bonus doesn't come until the 15th, and the mortgage is due." The mortgage. I set down my fork. I thought the house was paid off. "That's what you told me 3 years ago, the refinancing emergency. Remember I sent $5,000. Silence. My mother looked at Paul. Paul studied his plate. "That was for other things," my mother finally said. You don't understand how expensive it is to maintain a house. Rachel, you rent? Something cold crystallized in my chest. What other things? Don't take that tone, Paul snapped, the old threat creeping into his voice. We don't owe you an accounting. Family helps family. Or did they not teach you that at your fancy college? I stayed 2 more days, each interaction confirming what I'd begun to suspect. They weren't struggling. They were thriving on my money. Every crisis had been manufactured, every emergency a lie. They'd turned me into their personal ATM, and I'd supplied the PIN code willingly. The spa brochure on my mother's dresser was the final straw, a luxury wellness retreat, scheduled for January. Paul's Christmas gift to me, she said when she caught me looking. He's so thoughtful. I flew back to Seattle on Christmas Day, claiming a work emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. The emergency was that I'd finally seen the truth, and I needed distance to process it. On the plane, I opened my banking app and scrolled through 3 years of transfers. One $200 became $1,500, became $1,800. Some months had emergency additions. I did the math, $74,000. $74,000 given to 2 people who drove a BMW and planned cruises while I ate ramen and declined coworker happy hours. That night, I didn't answer their call, or the next one. My phone exploded with messages, escalating from concern to anger to threats. Paul left a voicemail that would have terrified the girl I used to be. You ungrateful bitch. After everything we've done for you, your mother is in tears. This is how you repay us. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman who'd clawed her way out of their house, through college, into a career. A woman who'd been systematically drained by the very people who should have celebrated her success. The automatic transfers continued for now. Canceling them required more strength than I'd built yet. But something had fundamentally changed. The spell was breaking. The guilt was transforming into something else, anger. They called religiously, left messages designed to trigger every programmed response. I listened to them like a security analyst examining malware, noting techniques, identifying patterns. My training was serving me in ways Sinteltra never intended. Back at work, I threw myself into a project on social engineering, how hackers manipulated human psychology to breach systems. The parallels to my own life were so obvious it was almost funny. Almost. January's transfer went through as scheduled, but I'd started building something new alongside my regular spreadsheets, a plan. If they wanted to treat me like a financial resource to be exploited, perhaps it was time to show them what happened when the resource fought back. The girl who'd hidden journals behind her dresser had grown into a woman who understood systems, vulnerabilities, and exploits, and family. I was learning. Didn't exempt you from consequences. They'd trained me to be their victim. What they'd actually created was something far more dangerous, a survivor with the skills to dismantle everything they'd built on my back. But first, I needed more data, more evidence, enough for them to bring about their own downfall. The calls kept coming, I kept documenting, and somewhere in Seattle, a plan began to take shape, one spreadsheet cell at a time. 6 months after that Christmas revelation, I developed a routine: work, document, transfer money, repeat, but something had shifted in the dynamics. I'd started asking questions during our calls, polite ones, carefully framed. How's Paul's back pain? Is the medication helping? Did the insurance cover the water heater? My mother's responses grew increasingly vague, defensive. Why all these questions? She'd snap. Don't you trust us? Trust. The word had become meaningless between us. Currency as devalued as the promises they'd broken. The invitation came through my work email on a Thursday afternoon in July. Sinteltra's summer executive dinner, a fancy affair at Altura, one of Seattle's most exclusive Italian restaurants. As a team lead, my attendance was strongly encouraged, plus one's welcome. I RSVP'd for one, planning to fly solo as usual. Then my phone rang. My mother, outside her scheduled Sunday slot. Surprise! Her voice was artificially bright. Paul and I are coming to visit. We've already booked flights. We'll be there next weekend. Isn't that wonderful? My blood ran cold. They'd never visited, never shown interest in my life beyond its earning potential. Why? Can't parents visit their daughter? Paul's been saying we should see this fancy life you've built. Make sure you're not wasting money on unnecessary luxuries while we struggle. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd mentioned the executive dinner in passing, probably described it as a work thing, but Paul had always been good at reading between lines, sensing opportunities. They arrived Friday evening, my mother clutching a knockoff designer bag, Paul wearing a new watch that caught the light. I'd offered to pick them up. They'd taken an Uber. Didn't want to inconvenience you, Paul said, but I caught him checking out my Honda Civic with disapproval. Not the luxury car he'd expected from someone who sent home $800 monthly. My apartment disappointed them too. It's so small, my mother said, looking around my one-bedroom. For what you make. Seattle's expensive, I replied, watching Paul mentally calculate my rent, my salary, wondering where the rest went. If only he knew it went to them. Saturday morning brought the ask. We should celebrate being together, Paul announced. That fancy work dinner you mentioned we should go. Our treat, of course. His smile was predatory, already planning something. It's a work event, employees and partners only. Partners. He seized on the word. We're your family, more than partners. Don't be selfish. Rachel, we came all this way. The old triggers still worked. Just weaker now, I agreed. Knowing resistance would mean a weekend of punishment, made a reservation at Altura for the same night, praying we wouldn't overlap with my colleagues. We did. The hostess led us to our table just as my team was being seated across the restaurant. Emma waved. Surprised, I waved back, stomach churning. Paul noticed the exchange, his eyes lighting up with possibility. Your coworkers. He was already standing. We should say hello. I want to meet these people who've stolen my daughter. Before I could stop him, he was crossing the restaurant, my mother trailing behind. I followed, feeling like I was walking to an execution. You must be Rachel's friends, Paul boomed, interrupting their conversation. I'm Paul, her father. This is her mother, Linda. We've heard so much about you all. Stepfather. I didn't correct. The word would have been a declaration of war. My colleagues were polite, confused by the sudden intrusion. Paul worked the table like a politician, shaking hands, dropping comments about how proud they were, how much I talked about my little job, each word carefully chosen to diminish me, to establish his dominance. She gets her work ethic from me, he told my manager, Marcus. Always pushed her to exceed expectations, though sometimes I worry she's too focused on career. Family should come first, don't you think? Emma tried to catch my eye. Sensing something wrong, I kept my gaze down, reverting to childhood patterns. Don't react. Don't give him ammunition. Just survive. We should let you get back to your dinner, my mother finally said, tugging Paul's arm. Actually, Paul's smile widened. Why don't you join us at our table, I insist. My treat. I want to hear all about what my daughter does that's worth abandoning her family for. The trap was elegant. Refusing would seem rude, antisocial. Accepting meant an evening of Paul performing, my colleagues unknowingly providing him with intelligence about my life, my salary, my prospects. Marcus, ever diplomatic, declined graciously. That's kind, but this is a company event. Perhaps another time. Paul's face darkened for just a second. There it was, the flash of rage I knew so well. Then the mask slipped back. Of course, another time. Back at our table, the real Paul emerged. Rude? Incredibly rude. Is that how people behave in Seattle? No wonder you've forgotten basic manners. The waiter approached with menus. Paul waved them away. We'll have the tasting menu, the wine pairing too. Nothing but the best for my family. I watched the prices add up. 7 courses, premium wine, the kind of meal that would cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Paul ordered with the confidence of someone who'd never seen the bill. Must be nice, he said between courses, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Having expense accounts, company dinners. Meanwhile, your mother and I eat leftovers most nights, but we sacrifice so you could have better. My mother nodded along, playing her role. We're just happy you're successful, even if you've forgotten where you came from. The pattern was so familiar, it was almost comforting. The public performance, the guilt, the reminders of sacrifice, but something was different. I had my phone in my purse, and inside it, a recording app I'd activated the moment we sat down. My job had taught me the value of documentation, of evidence. I haven't forgotten, I said quietly. I send money every month. Paul's laugh was sharp. Money. You think money replaces family, replaces presence. Your mother cries herself to sleep, wondering what she did wrong, why her daughter treats her like a bill to be paid instead of a mother to be loved. The couple at the next table glanced over, uncomfortable. Paul had always been good at making private abuse seem like public concern. Dessert arrived, some architectural creation I couldn't taste. Paul was building to something. I could feel it. The evening had been too smooth, his performance too controlled. Then the check came. The waiter placed it discreetly by Paul's elbow. He didn't touch it, just continued talking about sacrifice, about ungrateful children, about the burden of raising someone else's child, the first acknowledgement all evening that I wasn't his blood. The leather folder sat there, radiating tension. The waiter circled back, confused. Paul ignored him, ignored the check, kept talking. My mother studied her empty wine glass. Finally, inevitably, I reached for it. The moment my hand touched the leather, Paul exploded. Of course, his voice carried across the restaurant. Of course you'd grab that. Can't let your poor parents have one nice evening without reminding us who has the money, who has the power. Paul, you said... His hand came down on mine, not quite a slap, but forceful enough to hurt. I said it was my treat, but you couldn't wait, could you? Had to show everyone that Paul needs his stepdaughter's charity, had to humiliate me. Tears, perfectly timed, rolled down my mother's face. We just wanted one nice evening, one evening where we felt like equal members of this family, not beggars. The restaurant had gone quiet. Waitstaff hovered, uncertain. My colleagues across the room had stopped eating, Emma half standing like she might intervene. I pulled out my credit card, hands steady despite the familiar shake inside, signed the check, $847.62, for two people who claimed they could barely afford groceries. Happy, Paul sneered. Feel powerful now. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To lord your success over us. We left in silence, my mother sniffling for effect. Paul's hand possessive on my shoulder, not affection, but control, making sure I didn't bolt. Outside, away from the audience, he grabbed my arm. That was embarrassing, he hissed. Your coworkers watching you disrespect us. This is what Seattle's done to you, turned you into someone who enjoys watching her parents grovel. But I wasn't the same girl who'd fled to college. I pulled my arm free, stepped back. You insisted on coming. You ordered the most expensive meal. You said it was your treat. His face went red, then white. For a moment, I thought he might hit me, right there on the Seattle sidewalk. Then he remembered we weren't in Colorado, weren't in his house. Here, I had resources. Here, hitting me had consequences. We're leaving tomorrow, he announced. Being around you is toxic for your mother's health. They took an Uber back to their hotel paid for with my credit card. Of course, I walked home despite the distance, needing air, needing space, needing to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed. Emma, are you okay? That looked intense. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How did you explain a lifetime of manipulation to someone who'd grown up with parents who celebrated her achievements? Instead, I opened my recording app. Perfect audio of the entire dinner, Paul's performance, my mother's tears, the crack of his hand on mine, all of it captured, digitized, saved. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't feel guilty. I felt something else entirely. Prepared. They left Seattle the next morning without saying goodbye. My mother texted from the airport. Paul is hurt beyond words. I hope you're satisfied. I was, actually, more satisfied than I'd been in years. Monday at work. Emma cornered me in the break room. That was your stepfather, wasn't it? Not your father? I nodded, surprised she'd caught the distinction. The way you changed when he approached our table. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I recognized it. My ex used to make me shrink like that, in public especially, right? They're always worse with an audience. It was the first time anyone had named what I'd experienced. Not family drama, not complicated relationships, abuse. The words sat between us, heavy and validating. I recorded the whole dinner, I admitted. On my phone. Emma's eyes sharpened. She worked in our digital forensics division. Good instinct. Evidence is everything. She paused. You know, if you ever need help understanding your options, legally speaking, I know some people. I filed that away, not ready yet, but grateful for the door she'd opened. The recording became my new obsession. I'd transferred it to my laptop, backed it up to multiple clouds, transcribed every word. Working in cybersecurity had taught me redundancy. Trauma had taught me paranoia. The combination was proving useful. Late nights, I'd replay specific moments. The crack of Paul's hand on mine had captured beautifully sharp, undeniable. His words, so carefully chosen to wound while maintaining plausible deniability, sounded different on playback. Without the emotional chaos of the moment, I could hear the calculation, the performance. I started recording our phone calls too. Washington was a two-party consent state, but the calls originated from Colorado, which only required one-party consent. My legal research was becoming as thorough as my technical work. Rachel, honey, my mother's Sunday call began. Paul's still so hurt. You really should apologize. For what, exactly? For embarrassing him, for making him feel small. You know how proud he is. I let the silence stretch. A new tactic I'd learned. Abusers and their enablers couldn't stand silence. They'd fill it, usually with more rope to hang themselves with. He's been so depressed, she continued. He's talking about cutting you off completely. No more calls, no more relationship. Is that what you want? The threat that once would have sent me spiraling now felt like a gift. That's his choice to make. How can you be so cold? Real tears now, or a good approximation. After everything we've done for you, do you know what it cost to raise you the money, the time, the opportunities Paul gave up? How much? I asked, pulling up a spreadsheet. Give me a number. What did it cost? That's not you can't put a price on parenting. But you just did. You said there was a cost. I'm asking what it was. She hung up, but I knew they'd call back. The automatic transfers were still hitting their account. As long as that pipeline stayed open, they'd tolerate my small rebellions. I spent the next month diving deep into family financial abuse, elder abuse laws, fraud statutes. My browser history would have concerned anyone looking. But I was building something. Not sure what yet, but something. Then Sinteltra announced our department was getting new equipment. High-end recording devices for security assessments, micro cameras for physical penetration testing, stuff that would make my phone's recording app look like a child's toy. Hey, Marcus, I asked during the equipment briefing, what happens to the old devices? Usually recycled. Why? I'm working on a personal project about workplace harassment and documentation. Would it be possible to purchase some of the older equipment? He studied me. I'd never mentioned the restaurant incident, but gossip traveled. Sure, fill out the asset disposal form, nominal fee, maybe $50 for a recording setup. That night, I opened a new spreadsheet, not for tracking money sent, but for planning something bigger. Columns for evidence type, legal statute, potential damages. I was building a case like I'd build a security protocol layered, redundant, ironclad. The micro recorder arrived in a plain box, smaller than my pinky nail, 8 hours of battery, voice activated, the kind of thing we'd use to catch insider threats. I practiced hiding it collar, cuff, hair clip, ran tests until I could activate it without looking. My mother called midweek. Unusual. We're having a family dinner next month. Paul's entire family. You need to be there. I have work. You always have work. That's the problem. Rachel, you've forgotten what matters. Paul's siblings will be there. Their children. They all want to see you. Paul's family had never wanted to see me when I lived at home. I'd been the unwelcome addition, the reason he'd had to settle for a woman with baggage. Now I was successful, and suddenly I was family. Where? Tuscany's, you remember, Paul's favorite. I remembered overpriced Italian food in downtown Denver, the kind of place Paul took clients to impress them, the kind of place with leather-bound menus and sommeliers. I'll check my schedule. But I'd already decided this wasn't about family dinners. This was about something else, some new angle Paul was working, and I'd be ready. I spent weeks preparing, bought a new suit jacket with internal pockets perfect for concealing devices, practiced facial expressions in the mirror, engaged but not emotional, present but not vulnerable, downloaded Colorado statutes on fraud, extortion, identity theft. Because something else had been nagging at me, those financial emergencies, always conveniently timed, the vague medical bills, Paul's supposed cut hours that never affected their lifestyle. I'd been too deep in the fog to see it before, but distance and recording had cleared my vision. They weren't just taking my money, they were lying about why they needed it, and in my world, we had a word for that fraud. The recorder went everywhere with me now. Practice runs at grocery stores, coffee shops, learning its range and limitations. I recorded myself reading legal statutes, creating audio notes for the file I was building. Testing, October 3rd. I'd whisper into my collar. Device concealed in standard business attire. Voice activation functioning normally. My colleagues probably thought I'd lost it, talking to myself in the parking garage, but I was preparing for war with the methodical precision Paul had taught me. He'd always said I was too sensitive, too emotional. He'd been wrong. I wasn't too emotional. I was patient. I was thorough. And I was done being their victim. The family dinner was 3 weeks away. Paul would expect the same Rachel who'd reached for that check, who'd paid without protest. He'd get someone else entirely, someone still playing the part but recording every word, every gesture, every threat. Emma found me in the server room one evening, organizing cables with obsessive precision. "You're planning something," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just protecting myself." She smiled, recognizing a kindred spirit. "Good. Whatever it is, document everything. And Rachel, when you're ready to make your move, you don't owe anyone advance warning. Abusers don't give you notice before they strike. You don't owe them any either." I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not for reconciliation, not for the family I'd never had. Hope for freedom, for justice, for the chance to finally stop paying for the crime of existing. The recorder sat in my pocket, a tiny weight with enormous potential. Every word they'd say at that dinner would be preserved, analyzed, weaponized if necessary. They'd trained me to be silent, to absorb, to endure. They should have trained me to forgive. But they didn't, and now I had 3 weeks to prepare for a dinner that would change everything. 3 weeks to perfect my performance while they prepared theirs. The only difference, my performance would be admissible in court. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and discovery. What started as simple recording practice evolved into something more comprehensive. I'd requested my credit reports, something I'd never done before. Paul had always handled financial matters when I lived at home, insisted it was too complicated for me to understand. The reports told a different story than my bank statements. 4 credit cards in my name I'd never applied for. Personal loans totaling $45,000, opened with frighteningly accurate personal information. My mother wasn't just listed as an authorized user. She was the primary contact on accounts opened when I was barely 18. "Identity theft," Emma said when I showed her, breaking our unspoken agreement not to discuss my situation directly. "This is textbook. You need to file a police report." "Not yet," I said, photographing each document. "I need more." The more came through patient digging. Social engineering in reverse, I called each creditor, playing confused daughter. My mom said she'd been helping me build credit since college. I just want to understand the accounts better. Customer service representatives, sympathetic to a young woman trying to understand her finances, provided transaction histories. The purchases painted a clear picture: luxury goods, vacations, electronics, the vacation to Cabo last year while I ate ramen, the 75-inch TV that arrived the month I'd sent extra for my mother's emergency surgery. Every transaction downloaded, organized, cross-referenced with the dates of their financial crises. The pattern was damning. They'd request money for necessities. Then luxury purchases would appear on credit cards they'd opened in my name. My childhood journal-keeping habit served me well. I built a timeline, comprehensive and irrefutable. Date of supposed emergency, amount sent, corresponding fraudulent charge. The debt they'd accumulated in my name roughly matched what I'd given them voluntarily, like they felt entitled to double dip. Colorado law was clear. Identity theft by a family member was still identity theft. The relationship was an aggravating factor, not a mitigation. I printed the statutes, highlighted the relevant sections. Maximum penalties: 12 years in prison for each count. The micro recorder got a camera small enough to hide in a jacket button. Video evidence to accompany audio. I ran tests, checking angles, ensuring faces would be visible. My cybersecurity training had unexpected applications. Tuscany's, November 15th, 7 p.m. My mother's reminder call came the week before. Paul's made reservations for 12. His whole family's coming. 12 people, an audience for whatever performance they'd planned, but also 12 witnesses. I flew into Denver the morning of, renting a car at the airport. Didn't tell them I'd arrived early. Instead, I drove to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Identity Theft Unit. Not to file a report, not yet, but to understand the process. The detective I spoke with was thorough, kind. Family identity theft is more common than people think, she said, and often more devastating. Family has access to everything: social security numbers, birth dates, mother's maiden names. The emotional betrayal makes it harder to report. Hypothetically, I said, if someone had evidence of pattern behavior, recordings of admissions, documentation of fraud, what would happen? She leaned forward. Hypothetically, that would be a prosecutor's dream case. Most identity theft is hard to prove because victims don't realize until years later. Current evidence, recorded admissions, that's rare and valuable. I thanked her, left with her card and a folder of resources. The recording equipment felt heavier knowing its potential legal implications. The hotel room became my command center for the evening. I tested equipment one final time, practiced activating devices without looking, reviewed my notes on Paul's family, his brother Tom, the real estate agent, sister Karen, the nurse, their spouses and adult children, people who'd treated me like an inconvenience at family gatherings, now apparently eager to reconnect. At 6:30, I dressed carefully, conservative blazer with hidden pockets, devices secured and tested, small purse with backup battery packs disguised as makeup compacts. I looked professional, successful, everything Paul claimed I'd become at their expense. The drive to Tuscany's was familiar. How many times had I made this trip as a child? Stomach cramping with anxiety, knowing dinner would be a performance where I was both prop and audience. Tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't the victim in their show. I arrived exactly on time, neither early enough to seem eager nor late enough to provide ammunition. The hostess led me to a private dining room. Paul had spared no expense, or rather, I had spared no expense, unknowingly. They were already assembled. Paul at the head of the table, my mother to his right. His siblings and their families filled the remaining seats, leaving one chair at the far end. The placement was deliberate, isolated, minimized. Rachel, Paul's voice boomed with false warmth. Our successful Seattle executive finally graces us with her presence. I smiled, activating the recorder with a brush of my collar as I sat. Hello, everyone. The greetings were stilted, curious. They studied me like anthropologists examining a new specimen. Paul's brother Tom spoke first. Paul says you're doing well out there. Some computer thing. Cybersecurity, I corrected. Digital forensics, specifically, I investigate fraud, identify vulnerabilities, trace illegal activities. The temperature in the room shifted slightly. Paul's smile tightened. Sounds boring, Karen laughed, but it was nervous. All those numbers and codes? Actually, it's fascinating, I said, accepting wine from the server. You'd be amazed how much evidence people leave behind. Digital footprints are almost impossible to erase completely. Even deleted files. Cleared histories, we can recover it all. Let's not talk shop, Paul interrupted. This is a family dinner. But Tom was interested. Really? Even old stuff like years ago. Especially old stuff, I confirmed. Financial fraud. For instance, every transaction leaves multiple trails. Bank records, credit reports, merchant systems. People think they're clever, but patterns always emerge. Family fraud is particularly easy to trace because the perpetrators get comfortable, sloppy. My mother's hand shook slightly as she reached for her water. Paul's jaw clenched, but he couldn't shut down the conversation without seeming suspicious. Tom was leaning forward, genuinely engaged. We had a client, Tom said, whose kids stole their identity, opened a bunch of cards. Is that common? More common than you'd think, I said, looking directly at Paul. Though it's usually the other way around. Parents stealing from children. After all, kids' credit is clean. Their information is easily accessible, and most don't check their credit reports until they're adults. That's horrible, Karen breathed. What kind of parent would do that? The kind who feels entitled, I said, who sees their children as extensions of themselves rather than separate people, who justify it as collecting what they're owed for the burden of raising them. Paul's face was reddening. Fascinating career choice, Rachel, though I wonder if it pays enough to justify abandoning your family. I haven't abandoned anyone, I said calmly. I send money home every month, have for years. I have all the records. Money, he spat. Always about money with you. Strange, I mused. That's what I was thinking. Every call, every conversation, it always comes back to money. Doesn't it? How much you need. How much I should send. How ungrateful I am for questioning it. The relatives exchanged glances. This wasn't the dynamic they'd expected. Paul had painted a picture ungrateful daughter, suffering parents. The reality was uncomfortable. Perhaps we should order, my mother suggested weakly. But Paul was beyond de-escalation. The audience he'd assembled to shame me was seeing too much, asking the wrong questions. His control was slipping. You want to talk about money? He stood, hands flat on the table. Let's talk about what you cost us, the sacrifices, the opportunities I gave up. You owe us everything, and you dare sit there calculating. How much? I asked, pulling out my phone. You've mentioned this debt numerous times. I'm prepared to settle it. Just tell me the exact amount I owe for being raised. You can't, that's not how family works. Then stop billing me for it, I said. Stop calling with emergencies that coincidentally match the price of your new TV. Stop claiming poverty while planning cruises. Stop. You little bitch, he snarled. And there it was, the Paul I knew. The one his family rarely saw. After everything like the credit cards in my name, I asked quietly. The loans I never applied for, the $45,000 in debt I discovered last week. The room went silent. Karen's husband pulled out his phone, suddenly interested in something else. Tom stared at his brother, calculation in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, Paul said, but his voice had lost its power. Of course not, I agreed. Just like you didn't know about the recording devices I've been wearing to our conversations. Just like you don't know that identity theft is a felony with a 12-year maximum sentence per count. My mother sobbed real tears this time. Rachel, please. We're family. Yes, I said, standing. We are, which makes what you did worse, not better. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. I came tonight to give you a choice. The transfers stop immediately. You have 30 days to pay back everything, the fraudulent debt and the money I sent, or I file charges. You wouldn't, Paul said. but uncertainty colored his threat. "I'm very good at my job," I told him. "I've built an airtight case, documentation, recordings, transaction histories. My colleague in digital forensics called it textbook. Would you like to test me?" I placed a business card on the table, the detective from the identity theft unit. "She's expecting my call. 30 days. Paul lunged forward, hand raised, the familiar gesture that had terrified me for years. But I didn't flinch. The camera was recording. Witnesses surrounded us, and I wasn't a child anymore. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Hit me, please. It'll make the prosecution so much easier." He froze, hands suspended, finally understanding the trap he'd walked into. His family stared, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. I gathered my purse, nodded to the relatives. "Enjoy your dinner. Paul's treating. Apparently, though I'd recommend checking whose name is actually on the credit card." I left Tuscany's without looking back, but my phone started buzzing before I reached my rental car. Tom, Paul's brother, asking if we could talk, Karen, sending a text. We had no idea. 3 cousins I barely knew, suddenly interested in connecting. I ignored them all. The family that had treated me like an unwelcome obligation for years didn't get to claim concern now. Back in my hotel room, I uploaded the evening's recordings to multiple secure servers. The video was crystal clear. Paul's raised hand, his snarled, "little bitch," the moment his mask slipped in front of everyone. The audio caught every admission, every threat, every piece of evidence a prosecutor could want. My mother called 47 times that night. I let them all go to voicemail, then listened with clinical detachment. "Rachel, please, you don't understand what you're doing. Your father, Paul, he's having a breakdown. Is that what you wanted? How can you threaten us with prison? We're your parents. Please call me back. We can work this out. We're family." By morning, the messages had evolved. Paul had taken over, his voice controlled but seething. "You think you're smart with your recordings and threats, but you're forgetting something. I know things about you, embarrassing things. Do you want your precious colleagues to know about your breakdown junior year, the therapy, the medication? I have documents. Rachel, don't test me." I almost laughed. He thought my mental health struggles were leverage. He didn't understand that in my industry, half of us were in therapy, that admitting to getting help for trauma was seen as strength, not weakness, that his threats said more about him than me. But it gave me an idea. I called Emma from the airport. "I need a favor. Can you get me in touch with your friend, the family law attorney?" "Already texted her. She's expecting your call. And Rachel, I'm proud of you." The flight back to Seattle felt like emerging from underwater. Every mile between me and Colorado made breathing easier. I delivered my ultimatum. Now came the chess match. Patricia Winters, Emma's attorney friend, met me for coffee the next day. She reviewed my documentation with professional appreciation. "This is meticulous," she said. "The recordings especially. Colorado's one-party consent law means they're fully admissible. The identity theft is criminal. But we can also pursue civil damages, pain and suffering, credit rehabilitation costs, lost opportunities due to damaged credit." "I don't want their money," I said. "I want them to stop." Sometimes the threat of financial consequences is the only thing people like this understand. "May I ask what made you start recording?" I thought about it. My job taught me to see patterns, vulnerabilities. I finally recognized I was living in a system designed to exploit me. Once I saw it as a security breach instead of a family dynamic, the solution became clear. Document, analyze, neutralize the threat. Patricia smiled. "You'd make a good lawyer. Now, let's talk strategy." We crafted a formal demand letter, precise, clinical, devastating. It outlined every fraudulent account, every forged signature, every instance of identity theft. The letter gave them 2 options: full restitution and closure of all accounts within 30 days, or criminal prosecution. "Send it certified mail," Patricia advised, "and email copies to both of them. Create a paper trail they can't deny receiving it." That done, I did something I should have done years ago. I froze my credit. placed fraud alerts on all accounts, and began the tedious process of disputing every fraudulent charge. Each phone call to creditors felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The retaliation came quickly. Paul emailed my personal account with attachments medical records from my college therapy sessions, somehow obtained. The subject line, "Think carefully." I forwarded it directly to Patricia. "Add HIPAA violations to the list," she said grimly. "He just committed another felony trying to blackmail you out of reporting his previous felonies. He's not very bright, is he?" "He's used to me being scared," I replied. "He doesn't know how to handle anything else." My mother tried a different approach. She started calling my work number, leaving tearful messages with reception about urgent family emergencies. When that didn't work, she escalated to emails to my company's general inbox, asking them to intervene in our family misunderstanding. I documented everything, then met with Marcus and HR, laid out the situation with professional detachment family members harassing me at work due to identity theft charges I was filing. HR's response was immediate and supportive. They blocked the numbers, flagged the emails, offered me resources through our employee assistance program. "If you need time off to handle this, just say the word," Marcus said. "And if they show up here, security will handle it." 2 weeks into the 30-day deadline, Paul's brother Tom called. I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. "Rachel, I've been doing some digging," he said without preamble. "After what you said at dinner, Paul's been borrowing money from the whole family. Always emergencies. Always paid back just enough to keep people trusting him. But the math doesn't add up." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Karen found out he used her kids' social security numbers to open utility accounts. Because I ran a background check and found liens we didn't know about. Because you were brave enough to say what we've all been ignoring." He paused. "We want to help. Whatever you need for your case witnesses. Statements, documentation. Paul's burned a lot of bridges. He just hid it well." The family Paul had assembled to shame me was turning into witnesses for the prosecution. I gave Tom my attorney's contact information, started building a bigger case than I'd imagined. My mother made one last attempt, showing up at my apartment building. The doorman called up, warning me. I watched through my window as she stood on the sidewalk, looking older than her years. Holding a box, I recognized my childhood things she'd saved. I didn't go down. Instead, I called building security, asked them to tell her to leave, watched as she set the box by the door and walked away, retrieved it later to find photos, report cards, my old journals, the ones I'd hidden behind my dresser, the ones that documented years of Paul's behavior. Inside was a note. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry I chose him over you. I'm sorry for everything. Please don't send your father to prison. Please." Your father. Even now. She couldn't call him what he was. Couldn't acknowledge that she'd chosen a man who terrorized her daughter, who stole from her, who built their comfortable life on fraud and intimidation. I added the note to my evidence file. Her admission of knowledge, of choosing him, it would matter in court. Day 28 arrived with no payment, no real attempt at restitution, only escalating threats, increasingly desperate manipulations. Paul had hired a lawyer, a cheap one who sent a badly written cease and desist letter that Patricia laughed at. "He's representing himself as the victim," she explained. "Claims you're extorting them, that the money you sent was gifts you're now trying to reclaim. It's amateur hour. He's panicking." Day 30 fell on a Tuesday. I took the day off, spent it in Patricia's office finalizing documentation. At exactly 3 p.m., we filed the police report: identity theft, fraud, extortion, blackmail. The detective from my earlier visit took the case personally. "Family identity theft cases are hard," she said, reviewing our evidence. "Usually there's no documentation, no clear proof. This is a prosecutor's dream. Clear evidence, patterns of behavior, recorded admissions. They made it easy for us." That evening, as arrest warrants were being prepared, my phone rang. Paul, one last time. "You win," he said, voice flat. "What do you want?" "I already told you. Full restitution, close the accounts, and then never contact me again." You're really going to send me to prison after I raised you. You didn't raise me, I said. You terrorized me. You stole from me. You turned my mother into your accomplice. You created this situation with every choice you made. I'm just introducing you to consequences. Your mother will never forgive you. She made her choice a long time ago. She chose you over protecting her child. I'm making my choice now. I choose me. I hung up, blocked both their numbers. Felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood complete. Absolute relief. The next morning, local news reported the arrest of a Marion Hill couple for identity theft and fraud. The amount, $45,000 plus years of extorted payments, made it newsworthy. Paul's job at the bank made it scandalous. I didn't watch the coverage, didn't read the articles, didn't answer the calls from reporters or distant relatives suddenly interested in my story. I'd already lived it once. I didn't need to relive it for an audience. Instead, I went to work, led my team meeting, investigated security breaches for other people, built something better from the ashes of what had been. The money would come eventually. Restitution was part of their plea deal. Patricia later told me, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the silence. No more Sunday calls, no more emotional manipulation, no more being treated like an ATM with a daughter's name. For the first time in my adult life, my money was mine. My choices were mine. My life was mine. It had only cost me everything I'd been taught to believe about family, duty, and forgiveness. Turned out, that was a price I could afford to pay. 6 months passed in blissful silence. The legal process ground forward. Paul and my mother had both been charged. Though their public defender was working on a plea deal, Patricia kept me updated, but I'd emotionally disconnected from the proceedings. They were just names on legal documents now, no longer the monsters under my bed. I'd been promoted at Sinteltra, now managing the entire threat detection division. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become an expert at identifying danger because I'd been raised by it. My salary had increased to $130,000, and for the first time, every penny was mine. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Not from them, they were legally barred from contacting me, but from Tom. "They're out on bail," he said. "Thought you should know. And Rachel. Paul's been talking. He blames you for everything. Says he's going to make you understand what you've done to the family." "Let him talk," I said, but I made a note, documented the call, old habits. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with interesting news. "Your mother's lawyer reached out. She wants to make a deal. Full confession. Testimony against Paul. In exchange for reduced charges. Apparently, your stepfather's been less than gentle since their arrest. She's ready to tell everything." The deposition was scheduled for the following month. I didn't have to attend, but Patricia thought it might help. Closure, she called it. I called it curiosity. My mother looked smaller in the conference room. Her designer clothes replaced with something modest, practical. The months had aged her, or maybe I was finally seeing her without the filter of desperate hope. She didn't look at me as she spoke, detailing years of financial fraud. Yes, Paul had masterminded it. Yes, she'd known. Yes, she'd signed documents, forged my signature when necessary. The credit cards, the loans, the systematic theft, she laid it all out with the same flat voice she'd once used to tell me to be grateful. "Why?" Patricia asked when the facts were established. "Why did you participate in defrauding your own daughter?" My mother finally looked at me then. "He said it was fair, that we'd spent so much raising her, putting her through school, that she owed us. And I believed him, or wanted to." Her voice broke. "I chose him over her. Every time. I chose him." I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pain, just the clinical interest of watching someone finally tell the truth. "The dinner at Tuscany's," Patricia continued. "Tell us about that." "Paul planned it for weeks. He knew Rachel had been pulling away, sending less money. He thought if the family saw how ungrateful she was, how successful while we struggled, they'd pressure her. He didn't expect—" She trailed off. "Didn't expect what?" "He didn't expect her to fight back, to have evidence, To be stronger than him. She looked at me again. You were never supposed to be stronger than him. The deposition continued for hours. Every forged document, every lie, every manipulation laid bare. By the end, the court reporter looked sick. Patricia had more than enough for the criminal case and a civil suit that would strip them of everything. As we prepared to leave, my mother spoke one last time. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But Rachel, be careful. Paul's not done. He's never been one to lose gracefully. I should have paid more attention to that warning. 3 days later, I arrived at work to find security in an uproar. Someone had sent emails from a spoofed address claiming I was being investigated for corporate espionage. Anonymous tips to HR about drug use, embezzlement, inappropriate relationships with subordinates. A coordinated campaign to destroy my professional reputation. We know it's bullshit, Marcus assured me. The IP traces lead to a public library in Colorado, but I need to ask any idea who's doing this. My stepfather, I said simply. He's out on bail for fraud charges I filed. This is retaliation. Centeltra's legal department got involved. Cease and desist letters were sent. The attacks escalated negative reviews on professional sites, attempts to access my work accounts, someone calling clients claiming to be investigating me for federal crimes. Then Paul made his mistake. He sent one email from his personal device, forgot to mask his IP. Our security team traced it instantly. More charges were filed: cyberstalking, harassment, violation of bail conditions. His bail was revoked. But he had one more play. I was working late, the office nearly empty, when reception called. Rachel? There's a Harold Jameson here. Says he's from Wells Fargo. Needs to discuss an urgent matter about your accounts. I didn't have accounts at Wells Fargo, but I knew Paul did. Send him to conference room B, I said. I'll be right there. I grabbed my recording equipment habit now and alerted security. Then I went to meet whoever Paul had sent. Harold Jameson was exactly what I expected. Cheap suit, nervous energy, the look of someone operating at the edges of legality. He had a briefcase full of documents, a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Morgan, thank you for seeing me. I'm here about some discrepancies in your financial history. My client believes you may have been involved in fraudulent activities. Your client being Paul Harrison. His smile faltered. I represent concerned parties investigating potential financial crimes. So Paul hired you to intimidate me. How much did he pay you, or did he promise a cut of whatever you could squeeze out of me? I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that you're here on behalf of my stepfather, who's currently in jail for fraud and identity theft. You're attempting to extort or blackmail me on his behalf. Are you aware that's a federal crime? The man stood abruptly. This was a courtesy call. Next time, it'll be federal investigators. Looking forward to it, I said. I'll make sure they know about this meeting. About you, Harold Jameson. Was it that your real name? He left quickly. Security walked him out. Got his license plate. I had his business card fake address, but real fingerprints. Added it all to the file Patricia was building. That weekend, I flew back to Colorado, not to Marion Hill, but to Denver. Patricia had arranged a meeting with the prosecutor. They wanted to add witness tampering, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. Paul's attempts to destroy me had only strengthened their case. He's looking at 15 to 20 years now, the prosecutor said. Your mother's testimony, plus this harassment campaign he's buried himself. We're also investigating his finances going back a decade. Turns out you weren't his only victim, just the most successful one. I gave my statement, handed over the new evidence, on the flight home. I thought about the family dinner that had started this avalanche. Paul had assembled an audience to watch him humiliate me one last time. Instead, they'd witnessed his downfall begin. A week later, news broke. Paul had been rearrested, charged with additional counts of fraud, conspiracy, and harassment. The investigation had widened his employer. The bank was looking into inconsistencies in accounts he'd managed. His siblings were cooperating with investigators about money they'd loaned him over the years. My mother pleaded guilty to reduced charges, 5 years probation, restitution payments, a permanent restraining order keeping her from contacting me. She'd avoided prison by turning state's evidence, but she'd lost everything else: her home, her reputation, her family. Paul went to trial. I didn't attend, but Patricia did. She said he spent the entire time glaring at the prosecutor, occasionally muttering about ungrateful children and conspiracies against him. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release. The restitution check started arriving a month later. Small amounts from my mother's garnished wages, larger ones from the sale of their assets: the house, the cars, the things they'd bought with stolen money. I set up a separate account, watched the balance grow. $45,000 to clear the fraudulent debt. Another $74,000 to repay what I'd sent over the years, plus interest, penalties, damages. By the time it was over, I'd recovered nearly $150,000. Money that had been mine all along, stolen through guilt and manipulation and outright theft. I donated half to a domestic violence shelter in Seattle, used some to take a real vacation 2 weeks in New Zealand, hiking and thinking and breathing freely. The rest went into savings, earning interest, growing into something Paul could never touch. Emma threw a quiet celebration when it was all over. Just our team, good whiskey, and no mention of why we were toasting. They knew enough that I'd face something difficult and won. "You did the impossible," she said later, walking me to my car. "You held them accountable. Most people never get that chance." "I got lucky," I said. "I had evidence. I had resources. I had distance." "You had courage," she corrected. "Don't minimize what you did." Driving home, I thought about the girl who'd hidden journals behind her dresser, documenting abuse she couldn't escape. She'd grown into a woman who documented everything, who turned survival skills into professional expertise, who finally said, "Enough." Paul had raised me to be silent, compliant, grateful for scraps. Instead, he'd created someone who collected evidence, recognized patterns, and refused to be anyone's victim. His greatest fear had been losing control. In trying to maintain it, he'd given me everything I needed to destroy him. The recordings, the fraud, the escalation every move he made tightened the noose he'd tied himself. I still have the recordings, every conversation, every threat, every moment that led to his conviction. Sometimes I think about deleting them, moving on completely, but they serve as a reminder of what I survived, what I overcame, what I'll never allow again. The girl who used to track Paul's footsteps through the house, calculating danger with every step, had grown up to track digital footprints that put him in federal prison. There was poetry in that, justice in that, closure in that. He'd wanted me to understand what I'd done to the family. I understood perfectly. I'd saved myself. 2 years after Paul's conviction, I'd almost achieved something resembling peace. My work at Sinteltra had evolved into consulting for major corporations, helping them identify insider threats and financial fraud. Ironic that my childhood had become my most valuable professional qualification. Then Marcus forwarded me an email. "This came to HR. Thought you should see it." From Linda Harrison, subject employment verification. Rachel Morgan. Dear Sinteltra HR Department, I am writing to verify employment and salary information for Rachel Morgan as part of a financial hardship application. As her mother, I have been advised that I stopped reading, even after everything. She was still trying to use me, still believing she had some claim to my success, my information, my life. Thanks for the heads up, I told Marcus. She's legally barred from contacting me. This violates her probation. Already forwarded to legal, he assured me. Just wanted you to know. That night, I called Patricia. What kind of financial hardship application requires my employment verification? None that are legitimate, she said. I'll look into it. What Patricia found was almost amusing in its desperation. My mother, working minimum wage and living in a studio apartment, had been trying to get loans, using our relationship as collateral, claiming I was supporting her, that my income was somehow relevant to her creditworthiness. "She's telling people you're reconciling," Patricia explained, "that the restraining order was a misunderstanding, that you're helping her get back on her feet. Send her a reminder about the legal consequences of violating the order," I said, "and notify her probation officer." But the attempts continued. Not direct contact, she'd learned that lesson, but sideways approaches. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years calling to say my mother was sick, dying, wanting to make amends. Former neighbors reaching out with stories of her suffering, her regret, her transformation. I documented each contact, forwarded them to Patricia, built another file, though this one felt more sad than threatening. She was playing the same games with weaker pieces, expecting different results. Then came the invitation that changed my perspective on everything. Tom called on a Wednesday evening. We'd stayed in touch sporadically since Paul's trial, bonded by the strange experience of discovering we'd both been victims of the same con artist. "Family reunion this weekend," he said. "I know it's weird to invite you, given everything, but Karen and I have been talking. You're more family to us now than Paul ever was. We'd like you there." "I don't think—" "Your mother won't be there," he interrupted. "Nobody's invited her. This is about the family moving forward, not looking back. Please, think about it." I thought about it for 3 days. These people had been strangers when I was growing up. Paul's relatives who'd treated me like an unwelcome addition, but they'd also stood by me during the trial, provided statements, testified to Paul's pattern of manipulation. I went. The reunion was at Tom's house in Boulder, a sprawling property with mountain views. 23 people, Paul's extended family minus 2 significant absences. Children who didn't know why Uncle Paul wasn't there. Adults who did and were trying to build something better. "I'm glad you came." Karen hugged me at the door. "We all are. You showed us who he really was. We owe you an apology for all those years of blindness." The afternoon was surreal but healing. Stories emerged, money Paul had borrowed and never repaid. Lies he'd told to different family members. Small cons that made sense in retrospect. Everyone had been touched by his manipulation, but I'd borne the worst of it. "He always talked about you," Tom's wife Sandra told me. "How difficult you were, how ungrateful. We believed him. I'm sorry we never questioned it, never reached out to hear your side." "You couldn't have known," I said, and meant it. Paul had been a master at narrative control, at painting himself as the victim. It had taken me 25 years and a career in fraud detection to see through it. As the sun set over the mountains, Tom pulled me aside. "There's something else. We've been cleaning out Paul's storage unit stuff he hid from the feds. Found some interesting documents." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were papers I recognized, my childhood journals, the ones my mother had returned. But there were other things too. Report cards with teacher comments about concerning home dynamics, a letter from a school counselor recommending family therapy, dated when I was 12, medical records from an ER visit I barely remembered. Paul's explanation of my clumsiness documented alongside the doctor's skeptical notes. "He kept trophies," Tom said quietly, "evidence of what he did, like he was proud of it. We thought you should have them, for your records, or to destroy, whatever gives you peace." I looked through the papers, seeing my childhood from a different angle. Adults had noticed, teachers, doctors, counselors they'd seen signs, documented concerns, but Paul had always had explanations. My mother had always backed him up, and I'd been too well trained to contradict them. "Thank you," I said, meaning more than just the documents. The drive back to Denver that night, I thought about family, not the one I'd been born into, but the one I'd chosen. Emma and my team at Sinteltra, Patricia, who'd become a friend beyond legal counsel. Even Tom and Karen, who'd transformed from Paul's enablers to my allies. My phone buzzed at a stoplight. Unknown number, Colorado area code. I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. "Miss Morgan. This is Shelley Davies from Mountain View Assisted Living. I'm calling about your mother, Linda Harrison. She's listed you as her emergency contact." "She's not supposed to have my information," I said carefully. "I understand there are Complications, but she's had a fall. She's at Denver General, asking for you. The doctors say she's stable, but I hung up, called Patricia. Is this real or another manipulation? Patricia called back 20 minutes later. It's real. Broken hip. Surgery scheduled for tomorrow. But Rachel, you don't owe her anything. That restraining order exists for a reason. I sat in my car in the dark, engine running, caught between the daughter I'd been raised to be and the woman I'd fought to become. She'd chosen Paul over me every time it mattered, participated in stealing from me, tried even after his conviction to use me. But she was also the woman who'd once sung while cooking dinner, before Paul, who'd slipped $20 bills in my backpack so I could hide from him, who'd saved my childhood journals, even if she'd given them to him. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I called Tom, explained the situation, asked if he or Karen could check on her, not for her sake, but for my own. I needed to know I hadn't become someone who could ignore genuine suffering, even from someone who'd caused me so much. She's got a long recovery ahead. Tom reported the next day. Surgery went well, but she's looking at weeks of rehab. She asked about you. I told her you knew but couldn't come. She just nodded. I set up an anonymous fund at the hospital to cover what her basic insurance wouldn't. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just human decency, the minimum required to sleep peacefully. Patricia helped me draft a letter to my mother's probation officer, clarifying that while I'd been notified of her medical emergency, I had not had direct contact and wished to maintain the restraining order, covering my bases, documenting everything, old habits. 2 weeks later, another call from Mountain View. My mother was back, recovering. Did I want them to remove me as emergency contact? Yes, I said. Please do. She wanted me to tell you something, the administrator said hesitantly. She said, I chose wrong, every time. She knows that. I thanked her and hung up, sat with those words, examining them for manipulation, finding only truth. She had chosen wrong, every time, and I knew that. But knowing didn't mean forgiving. Understanding the why didn't erase the what. I could hold compassion for the woman she might have been while maintaining boundaries against the woman she'd chosen to be. That weekend, I met Emma for drinks, told her about the hospital call, the reunion, the documents Tom had found. You handled it perfectly, she said. You can be human without being a victim. You can show mercy without offering yourself up for more harm. I keep thinking about those teacher's notes, I admitted. People saw. They tried to help, but the system failed. The system often fails, Emma agreed. But you didn't. You saved yourself. And who knows, maybe your story helps someone else save themselves. I thought about that as I walked home. Somewhere, there was probably another girl hiding journals, tracking footsteps, calculating survival. Maybe she'd grow up to work in security or law or teaching. Maybe she'd find her own way to transform survival skills into professional success. Maybe she'd learn what I'd learned, that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about choice. And choosing yourself isn't selfish sometimes. It's the only way to break the cycle. My mother had chosen Paul. I'd chosen freedom. Both choices had consequences. I could live with mine. 5 years had passed since Paul's conviction. I'd built a life so far removed from that scared girl in Marion Hill that sometimes she felt like a character in someone else's story. My consulting firm, Secure Start, specialized in helping companies identify and prevent internal fraud. Every client saved was a small victory against the Paul Harrisons of the world. The call that would bring everything full circle came on an ordinary Tuesday. Ms. Morgan, this is Detective Rivera from Denver PD. You worked with our financial crimes unit on the Harrison case. I have an unusual request. I set down my coffee, instantly alert. Has something happened with Paul? No. He's serving his sentence. This is about another case. A young woman, Emily Chen. No relation to you, recently filed charges against her parents for identity theft and financial abuse. The parallels to your case are striking. Her attorney wondered if you'd be willing to meet with her. Strictly voluntary, of course. I stared at my office wall, covered with certifications and awards I'd earned in the years since escaping Paul's control. Somewhere out there was another woman just beginning the journey I'd completed. "Send me her attorney's contact information," I heard myself say. Emily was 26, with the same haunted but determined look I recognized from my own mirror years ago. We met at a quiet cafe in Capitol Hill, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it might provide protection. "I've read your case files," she said without preamble. "My lawyer showed me. It's like reading my own story, except you actually won." "You'll win too," I said. "You're already doing the hardest part, standing up to them." She laughed bitterly. "My mother keeps calling my work. My father hired someone to follow me, document my wasteful spending. They're telling everyone I'm mentally ill, that I'm making it all up." "Standard playbook." I nodded. "They'll escalate before they fold. Document everything, every call, every encounter, every flying monkey they send. The evidence will bury them." We talked for 3 hours. I shared strategies, recommended resources, gave her Patricia's contact information, but mostly, I listened, validated, confirmed that yes, this was abuse. Yes, she deserved freedom. Yes, they were the criminals, not her. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said as we prepared to leave. "Do you ever regret it, sending him to prison?" "No," I said without hesitation. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the years I lost. But protecting myself was the sanest thing I ever did." And Emily, "You're not sending them anywhere. Their own choices are doing that." 6 months later, I got an email. Emily's parents had pled guilty, received probation and restitution orders. She'd started therapy, changed jobs, moved to a new apartment they didn't have the address for. She was free. That victory felt as significant as my own. The universe seemed determined to close every loop. A week after Emily's email, I received an official letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Paul Harrison, inmate number 47832-3, had submitted a request for victim-offender dialogue, a restorative justice program where inmates could apologize to their victims, take responsibility, seek closure. I shredded the letter. Then I taped it back together, stared at it for a week. "You don't owe him anything," Patricia reminded me when I asked her advice. "These programs can be healing for some victims, but they can also be manipulation opportunities for narcissists. You know which category Paul falls into." But I kept thinking about Emily, about all the others out there still trapped. Maybe seeing Paul now, powerless and caged, would complete something. Maybe it would provide material for the book I'd started writing, the guide for financial abuse survivors I wished I'd had. I agreed to one meeting, controlled environment, recorded, with the ability to leave at any time. The man in the visiting room looked nothing like the Paul who'd terrorized my childhood. Prison had aged him badly: gray hair, hollow cheeks, the deflated look of a bully without victims. He sat in shackles, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame. "Rachel," he said, and I was proud that his voice no longer triggered fear. "Thank you for coming." I said nothing, waiting. I'd learned the power of silence in our Sunday calls years ago. Let them fill it, reveal themselves. "I've had time to think," he continued, "about what I did. The counselors here, they say I have to take accountability. So I want to say, I'm sorry for taking your money. Not for the terror, not for the manipulation, not for stealing my childhood, my peace, my ability to trust. Just the money, the only part he'd been convicted for." "Is that all?" I asked. His face shifted, a flash of the old Paul. "You got everything back, more than everything. I'm in here. Your mother's got nothing, and you're rich and successful. What more do you want?" "Nothing," I said, standing. "I wanted to see if prison had changed you. It hasn't. You're still the same man who taught me to hide my journals, track footsteps, fear the sound of my own name, but you also taught me to document everything, recognize patterns, and protect myself. Those skills built my career and saved my life. So thank you for that, I guess." "You're thanking me," Confusion replaced anger on his face. For showing me exactly what kind of person to never become. For teaching me that family isn't about blood or obligation, but choice. For proving that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is show them who you really are, so they can choose to walk away. I left him sitting there, mouth open, still trying to find words to regain control, but I held all the cards now, and we both knew it. The drive back to Seattle felt like flying. Each mile was a victory lap, a celebration of distance both physical and emotional. I'd faced the monster from my childhood and found him small, ordinary, pathetic. My phone rang as I crossed into Washington. Unknown number, but I was feeling brave. "Is this Rachel Morgan?" An elderly woman's voice, uncertain but determined. "Yes." "My name is Dorothy Chen. No relation, common name. I read about your case online. My grandson. I think his parents are doing something similar, taking out cards in his name, using his college fund. I don't know what to do." "Give me your email," I said. "I'll send you some resources. And Dorothy, thank you for noticing. Thank you for caring. That's more than a lot of us get." That call led to others. Word spread through some invisible network of desperate grandparents, suspicious teachers, concerned aunts. My evenings filled with emails asking for guidance, validation, hope. Secure Start evolved. We added a pro bono division helping families identify and document financial abuse. Emily joined us part-time, turning her trauma into purpose. We created guides, held workshops, built a community of survivors helping each other navigate the legal and emotional complexities of holding family accountable. The book came out 2 years later. Blood Money, A Survivor's Guide to Family Financial Abuse. It hit the bestseller list briefly, not because it was brilliantly written, but because it filled a desperate need. The emails poured in gratitude, recognition, requests for help. I donated half the proceeds to domestic violence organizations, used the rest to expand Secure Start's pro bono work. Paul would hate knowing that his abuse had funded so much healing. That thought brought me more satisfaction than the money ever could. On the 10th anniversary of that dinner at Tuscany's, the night everything changed, I held a different kind of gathering. 23 survivors of family financial abuse, all at various stages of their journey. We met at the same restaurant, taking over their private dining room with a very different energy. 10 years ago, my stepfather tried to humiliate me in this room. I told the group, "Tonight, we're reclaiming it. Every person here has chosen their own well-being over family manipulation. That takes incredible courage." We shared stories, resources, sometimes just silent understanding. Emily was there, now a successful data analyst with boundaries like steel. Tom came too, representing family members who'd chosen accountability over enabling. As dessert was served, I pulled out a small device, the micro recorder that had captured Paul's abuse a decade ago. Such a tiny thing to have changed everything. "This saved my life," I said. Not because of the conviction it led to, but because it proved I wasn't crazy, that what I experienced was real, documentable, criminal. Everyone here has their own version of this evidence that set them free. The evening ended with a toast, not to revenge or justice, but to survival. To the children we'd been, who deserved protection. To the adults we'd become, who'd learned to protect ourselves. The check came. I paid it without flinching, without flashbacks. Just another business expense for a life built on the ashes of abuse. Outside, Emily lingered. "Do you think we'll ever fully heal, ever stop looking over our shoulders?" I don't look over my shoulder anymore. I realized as I said it. I look forward. That's the real victory, not that they can't hurt us, but that we're too busy building beautiful lives to notice if they try. I drove home through Seattle's rain-washed streets, thinking about the girl who'd hidden journals behind her dresser. She'd grown into a woman who published books, ran a company, saved others, not despite what she'd endured, but because of what it taught her. Paul was serving year 15 of 18. My mother was somewhere in Colorado, living whatever life she'd chosen, and I was here, surrounded by chosen family, doing work that mattered, free in every way that counted. The girl who'd once spent 847 hours on a dinner designed to humiliate her had transformed that humiliation into an empire of survival. Every dollar she'd been forced to spend had multiplied into resources for others escaping similar traps. That's the thing about survivors, we're alchemists. We take the poison they feed us and transform it into medicine for others. We take our pain and forge it into keys that unlock cages. We take their lessons in fear and teach courses in courage. My name is Rachel Morgan. I am no longer a victim. I am no longer afraid. I am no longer alone. And neither are you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonates with those who needed to hear it. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can discover these important stories. Your support helps us reach others who might be trapped in similar situations, showing them they're not alone and that escape is possible.